topic is the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was, at the time, an ensign with this is October 62, with about 7 or 8 months of seagoing experience under my belt, and I was stationed on the USS AGR-1. We were at that point the Navy manned 3 picket stations, one off of Boston, one off of New York, one to Washington. Those were the Air Force stations to which we reported. The Boston picket station was farther north, probably somewhat north of the coast of Maine, about 300 miles offshore. And the mission was to track and report all incoming aircraft incoming into the United States. We were the early warning system from the Atlantic Ocean side. We reported to the Air Force Air Defense Sector, the 3 that I mentioned earlier, and they would be compared to whatever had been filed, whatever flight plans had been filed, and if it matched a flight plan, then obviously it was not a danger. If there was a bogey, we would have to track it, and in theory we would be in a position to air control its interception. Anyway, we were on picket station off of Washington sector, and the news we were getting, I had duties in CIC, Combat Information Center, radio, and I was the registered publications officer for the ship and cryptologist, and therefore had a top secret clearance to handle the cryptology and the registered publications. So I had a little bit of input as to the world situation, which was accelerating as far as the animosity between Russia and the United States. But when the blockade was declared of Cuba by President Kennedy, our ship, the USS Guardian, received orders to move south to take up a position that reported into Miami, and that position would strategically be located so that it would provide any advanced aircraft warning to the Cuban Missile Blockade, the cruisers and destroyers that had formed the blockade around Cuba. So all aircraft coming in from the east that might be threats to the blockade would be reported to us and evaluated by the Miami Air Defense Sector. The mission was complicated in that we were given orders to track all aircraft moving in every direction, so it wasn't just incoming aircraft, and of course with the heightened concern about security and all the other military operations that were taking place in that area, it was a monstrous task to track all aircraft within the radius of our air surge radar and report them in. At that point, radio communications was the most difficult part. frequencies that worked during the day would not work at night after the sun went down. There was a constant battle to stay in communication so that our reporting would be current. When there was a self-awareness that I personally went through, and I think most of us that were thinking individuals went through when we were given those orders. There was a real belief that this may be the big one, the nuclear war between the United States and Russia. So there was a real concern for our loved ones back home and the threat that they were under, but strategically. But tactically, our concern was that we were on a ship that was reporting valuable intel to the military about threats, and it was my perception that we would be, if the balloon did go up, we would be one of the first ships that would be torpedoed by the Russian submarines that were working the area, so that the fleet would be blinded somewhat, not having the advance warning of incoming aircraft before an attack on the blockade. If it reached that point, we had no anti-submarine capabilities. We had primitive anti-air defenses, so we would have been sitting ducks, basically. We had no speed. The top speed of the ship was 6 knots. So to avoid a torpedo attack would be almost silly. So we went through this heightened workload and stress. The ship performed very well. The blockade, as we know now, was successful in that the Russian freighters that were carrying the missiles into Cuba to be placed in the missile sites that had been located by our U-2 flights were turned around and headed back to Russia, and the confrontation was averted. So there's a great sense of relief when that was over. When it was over, we received our orders to head back to port. The Miami air defense sector would no longer be manned. And on the way back, because we normally deployed for 3 weeks, we had food and supplies and movies that were predicated on that deployment. As it turns out, we were gone for 33 days. So we had gone from fresh milk to frozen milk, which turned me off the rest of my life on milk. There is nothing like a recently thawed glass of milk that had turned sour and you took a big slug. And we'd gone from frozen milk to powdered milk, so that just indicates what the supplies had been to. All the fresh fruit and vegetables had been exhausted. We were on much more primitive staples. The movies we had watched many, many times. When the person that was responsible for the movies went to pick them up at the naval base, they did the best they could, but the selection was usually pretty bad. So the most popular movies would have been viewed several times in the length of the cruise. So somewhere off South Carolina, we encountered Hurricane Ella, E-L-L-A. The building seas and the building winds went on for a couple of days, and most everybody was sick. I was fortunate in that I was feeling rather well. Only about 3 of the officers of the 16 officers were feeling 100%. They had stopped serving food, so the steward would make you a sandwich if you were hungry, which not many of us were hungry. The eye of the hurricane passed within 35 miles of us. The seas were unbelievable because we were such a slow ship, and the seas were so big. As we headed into the sea, once we mounted the crest and started down the other side, the propeller would kick out of the water and vibrate the whole ship like a brum 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 brum, shaking the whole ship. This happened every time we crested a wave. It was a very great concern on most people's part that the stern bearing would stand that. So there was always an attempt when you were on watch on the bridge to find a course that would minimize the propeller kicking out of the water. It wasn't so much at that point heading for home. We were just picking a course to survive at. So the course changed dramatically as the hurricane approached us, and then abreast, and then passed beyond us. And in the worst winds, I was standing in the bridge, and I happened to be watching the anemometer. A gust headed the anemometer through 60 miles an hour, 70 knots rather, 60 knots, 70 knots, and at about 77 knots dropped to zero because the anemometer had come apart and had blown the mechanism of the anemometer off the mast. So we never did feel that we had recorded the maximum wind speed, but I saw it go between 77 and 80 when it disappeared. Seas were up to 40 and 45 feet. As I said, always we were looking for a course that would minimize the amount of rolling and also the amount the prop would kick out. So that was somewhere in between those two extremes where you had to find that best case. Because we reported to the Air Force, coincidentally that particular cruise was a cruise that we had exchanged an enlisted man from our ship, a petty officer from our ship, went to the air defense sector, and a Air Force sergeant from the air defense sector was given orders to ride with us for that cruise. Little did he know that that cruise would turn into what it was. He was expecting 3 weeks of sea duty, and it turned out to be 33 days of uncomfortable hell. I smilingly remember that when we tied up in Davisville, Rhode Island at the mobile CB base, he was given his orders to return to his home station. He quickly ran down the brow, kneeled, and kissed the pier. That was one happy airman. The conditions as we approached the hurricane got worse and worse. You would lay in your bunk and press your back up against the bulkhead and your feet against the opposite side, the railing around the bed, to keep from rolling back and forth each time the ship rolled. The stewards in the wardroom, when they served meals, would wet down the table first so that the dishes and silverware would not slide across the table. They would have a pad and a white linen tablecloth, and they would then wet it down before they put the dishes on it so that it would not slide around. Our family had members that served in the military back to the Revolutionary War, and I had 3 uncles and an aunt that served in World War II, so the feeling was definitely on my part that I would serve in the military for some period of time before beginning my civilian career. I had at that point in Michigan State University, all male students had to take 2 years of ROTC, freshman and sophomore years, and you had a choice of Air Force or Army. You had to take it each quarter. So after I had served the 2 years in the Air Force, ROTC, they give you the opportunity to and encourage you to continue on, which would involve after the 4 years and the commissioning at the end of 4 years as a second lieutenant in the Air Force, then pilot training, and would involve a 5-year commitment after commissioning. I remember at Christmas time when I was a sophomore having a number of conversations with Priscilla and Mom and Dad, and deciding not to go forward in the Air Force because of the length of time. 5 years at that point in my life seemed like a greater period than I was willing to commit to. So at that point I decided that I was going to apply for Navy OCS, which that total commitment was 3.5 years. At this point, looking back, a year and a half is not a significant amount. Upon being accepted into the Navy, I also had the opportunity to choose to go naval air, but again, that commitment was 5 years, and again chose to stay with commissioning as a line officer and a I had not been engaged / married, my decision might have been different. I'm not sure. But I'm not one that rethinks decisions are made. So once the decision has been made, we move forward and make the best of it. My acceptance into OCS was for the class which began in November. I think it was a week before or 2 weeks before Thanksgiving in November 1961. OCS, Officer Candidate School, was located on the naval base in Newport, Rhode Island. As I had married Priscilla in June, the plans were made that Priscilla would stay in Boston, actually the suburb of Brookline, with cousin Reverend Ken Hike and Elnora Hike and their children, who lived in a big old 3 or 4 story, 3-story, I guess, old home in Brookline. Beautiful old home. He was the chaplain at Boston University and had several other duties in the area. So she would stay there, attempt to find a job, and I would come back to Brookline as often as weekend pass would allow it. Prior to my reporting, we arrived in Brookline a couple days before my reporting. They could not have been nicer. Took us around to show us some of the area, Plymouth, a number of other things. I remember we saw the movie West Side Story. I remember having fried clams for dinner one of the nights that we ate out, and one of the few times in my life that I have lost my dinner. I don't know whether it was nerves about reporting to OCS and this whole new episode of my life, or something about the fried clams, but I lost them when I got home. Reported to OCS on a rainy day. There was no effort on the Navy's part to shelter us from the rain. We stood in the rain a lot. When we went in to have our civilian clothes exchanged for our Navy uniforms, which at that point were, day-to-day, were dungarees and a chambray shirt and a little round white hat. Our civilian clothes were unceremoniously packed in a ball in a paper grocery bag, and they were returned to us many months later, having dried out, but taken on a permanent wrinkle and look. I was assigned to Echo Company 2, Section 2. We were in a barracks, a wooden barracks, World War II wooden barracks, and they were four-man bunks. My 3 roommates were Jack Stuckemeyer from St. Louis, Tom Sullivan from Malden, Mass., and I've forgotten the name of the third. He was from St. Louis also, but he had a girlfriend or fiance, and he had a lot of trouble with the separation from her. ended up washing out after 2 or 3 weeks. So basically we had a 4-man room with only 3 occupants. The duties that we had to perform in the barracks, most of them happened in the morning. We were assigned on a weekly basis various cleaning duties. The heads, the showers, the sinks, the toilets, the decks, the floors. We also stood a security watch, which obviously we weren't under any threat, but it was to get us into the swing of standing 4-hour watches and what that meant to your sleeping schedule. So the 4-hour watches were all the times that we were not in classes. The phone and security desk was manned by the students. They had a flashlight in the billy club. There were also officer candidates that were assigned security of the school area and were given a flashlight, a billy club, and had to patrol the perimeter. Obviously we were inside the naval base, so there wasn't much of a threat, but once again it was to start acclimating us to standing watches in addition to our daytime duties, and the responsibility of staying awake, staying alert. At any point you could be approached by one of the faculty or officers or chiefs and ask questions to check whether you were alert, understood your mission, and evaluate you. You were under scrutiny 24/7, so that any weak attributes that you may have would come out, thanks to the artificial pressure and the real pressure, and those people would obviously be washed out. We were given a book, which was a manual called the OCM, and that was to be guarded as a confidential document, and that was to teach us how to store and protect confidential documents. It was to be, if it wasn't in our possession, it was to be locked in our locker, and the locker was to be locked, so that again, the lesson of that whole thing, there was probably nothing in the manual that was truly confidential, but it was to be treated as confidential to begin developing the mindset that what classification meant and what it meant to protect it. Reveille was at 5 a.m. You get up, clean up yourself, then clean up your spaces, then go to chow. You march to chow as a company. The person that was in charge of marching, each individual was on a rotating basis, so each of us would have the opportunity / challenge of marching this group of civilians wanting to become officers to classes and meals and back to the barracks. Your bunks had to be made. The barracks had to be spotless. Usually the floors and the decks, as we know them, would be polished and buffed either in the evening or on weekends. Inspections came on a regular basis, all standing outside your rooms in the line on both sides of the hallway as the inspecting officers or petty officers moved down the line, asked questions if that was appropriate, pointed out and awarded blue gigs and red gigs. Blue gigs were a positive check, red gigs were a negative check. All those were kept track of and added to your personnel record to evaluate your performance along with your class grades. In the classes, we had weapons, navigation, seamanship, damage control, each of these classes would last 1/3 of the way through, and we would then change classes to have another set of classes.
In 1 mile, keep right to I-10 East.
The situation, because you're there under very controlled circumstances. My studying habits achieved the highest that I have in my life ever achieved.
Right to I-10 East.
High school, I studied very little. Graduated kind of in the upper third. College,
Continue 59 miles on I-10 East.
I studied more, but I also worked a lot. And so I finished in the upper third at OCS because it was so regimented, and that I had made the commitment to apply myself. I finished in the top 10%.